There's a rumor amongst Warhammer 40,000 players. I've heard a bunch, and that rumor is that all Space Marine detachments, except for Gladius and Stormlance, suck. The freaking Dark Angels, every detachment sucks. The Blood Angels, every detachment sucks, except for maybe one or two. So, is this true? Guys, do Dark Angels detachments actually suck? Well, the answer is maybe. So, I'm going to break down some really interesting stuff here. I've been doing a lot of experimenting with the Dark Angels as I've been transitioning into building a Dark Angels army myself, and I'm planning on bringing it to a major coming up here in a few weeks, assuming nothing crazy happens in the balanced status slate. So there are some actually incredibly awesome builds and combinations for each one of the Dark Angels specific detachments that I've come across. And there are some very, very exciting things that we can do that you can't do in, say, Gladius or Stormlance. Now, am I here to claim every single one of these detachments is better overall than Gladius and Stormlance? No. But do these detachments suck? Do they have no play? Not at all. As a matter of fact, there are some very, very significant things that you can only do these in these detachments. So I'm going to share some of the thoughts and some of the building that I've been coming up with across these detachments. And I'm going to back them up just a little bit for you to try to hope, I don't know, spur on your creative mind so that you can enjoy your Dark Angels the way they were meant to be played, as Dark Angels and not just green Ultramarines. So let's start with the Unforgiven Task Force. This is one that I hear people all the time naysaying. I actually think this is one of the better detachments, and it gives you some really, really incredible combinations that a lot of people just don't quite grasp. So what are the big strengths of this detachment? Well, the big strength is going to be excellent primary control. So if you're battle shocked, you're still set to OC1. If you get hit with the dreaded, Tyranid Shadow of the Warp, where every single thing in your army gets battle shocked, well, turns out you're still going to control all your primary. This is actually very, very powerful. Yeah, I know that is a relatively rare thing that comes up in the game, but it actually does matter. In addition to this, in your command phase, you're going to add +1 to OC on any of your units that I believe is controlling an objective. No, it's just in your command phase, you just get to add one to the OC of models in a unit. And this is actually very, very significant, especially when we start stacking some of the other things where we can get extra OC as well. You have incredible, and I say again, incredible stratagems. Now, the detachment rule, I would agree, is not as good or flexible as a Gladius or a Stormlance, but your stratagems are so, so good in this detachment, and I feel like people don't recognize exactly what we have available to us in the Unforgiven. So let me just talk about my personal favorite stratagem. I got the name of it here somewhere. This is going to be your Unforgiven Fury. This is a 1 CP stratagem that can be used in the fight phase or in the shooting phase, where you just give lethal hits to a unit. Now, if, and this is a qualifier on it, but if any unit in your army happens to be battle shocked right now, you'll be getting crits on 5s. Now, this is a very, very cool thing when you stack it with some of these super, super, super interesting things that Dark Angels have available to them. Think about inner circle companions, if you will. So if you're doing the sweep attack, which is going to be sustained hits 2 with 5 attacks each, then you could put lethal on that. Now it's lethal and sustained hits 2 on 6s. And then if you happen to have something that's battle shocked in your army, you go to crits on 5s. The actual amount of damage output comes from this unit is insane. You can also go even a step further. So you can do their strike profile, which already has the lethal hits on them. And then Azrael gives them sustained hits, so then you don't even have to use the stratagem on them. So you can actually do some really interesting combinations in Unforgiven that just don't work really anywhere else, which is actually pretty dang exciting. Now, this does kind of rely on the way that you utilize some of your leaders. For me personally, I always like to use Azrael as more of a front line unit. A lot of people like to take Azrael as like a back line unit that is just going to be generating command points. I'll do an entire video on why I think that's a big mistake. But I like to use him because he gives one of the best combat buffs in the entire game to his unit. A 4-up invulnerable save with sustained hits is freaking amazing. So you can get some insane damage combinations. Then, if a unit in your army ever does happen to become battle shocked, we can actually do some really, really cool jank with this. So if you take that unit, let's say a unit of scouts, for example, okay? Or incursors, or whatever. Let's say incursors, okay? Let's say you have some incursors, and your opponent killed 3 models to survive. You fail the battle shock on them. At that point in time, what I would highly recommend you do is jump that unit into a transport, whether it's a Storm Raven, whether it's an Impulsor, or a Land Raider, whatever. If you jump that unit into a transport, that unit will no longer be able to become unbattle shocked in your net command phase. And as long as that unit is now embarked in the transport, they will remain battle shocked for the rest of the game. A lot of people are going to argue with me on this. I will go ahead and point you toward the core rules transports, I think it's the bottom of page 17. If you read that page, it will say when a unit is embarked, they cannot be affected by any rule or ability, meaning the rule that allows your unit to become unbattle shocked at the start of your command phase will not affect that unit that is inside a transport. That is very, very powerful, which means for the rest of the game, as long as that unit is in the transport, whenever you use your stratagem to give yourself lethal hits, you will also get crits on fives, which gives you a mad, crazy damage potential power. This also stacks really well with Lionel Johnson. Lionel Johnson on his sweep attack with 16 attacks has sustained hits on it, 1 CP. Now he gets sustained hits and lethal on that. Stack that with the fact that he's going to be able to reroll hit rolls and win rolls of 1 because due to his native aura if you want. And then if you get those crits on fives, oh my goodness gracious, the amount of trauma, the generational trauma that the Lionel Johnson would actually put out with that is just truly, truly, truly brutal. So you can stack this with Hellblasters. I've run this with Hellblasters instead of Stormraven, the Hellblasters being led by Azrael. Azrael leads them, gives them sustained hits, 1 CP, give them lethals. If they get crits on fives, it becomes very, very brutal. This also stacks with some of the other stratagems that you might that you have. So if your opponents can ever shoot your Hellblasters, well, your Hellblasters get to shoot back with your sustained hits from Azrael. And so you can actually do some really cool things with that Hellblaster unit where they can actually even shoot like 5 times in a single game. Unforgiven gives us the opportunity. Does that mean that Hellblasters are always the best choice? No, but if I wanted to run it with Hellblasters, well, let me just paint the picture for you. They come out, sustained hits, lethal hits, oath of moment, boom, 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 boom. The guys who die from hazardous, you roll on 3-ups to get to shoot again. So now they've shot like maybe once or twice. Call it twice just because the guys who shot on death died. And then in your opponent's turn, Overwatch, boom, they shoot. Anyone who dies, on a 3-up, they get to shoot again. So that's potentially shooting 4 times. Then in your opponent's turn, if they shoot you and they don't wipe your unit, you can spend 1 CP to actually have a normal shooting phase back at them, which is your 5th activation. And then anyone who dies from hazardous on that activation as well would then shoot again on a 3-up when they died, which could be potentially 6 shooting rounds from this unit. Well, I guess you could argue 3 shooting and then like 3 partial shootings in a single battle round, which is kind of crazy, the amount of just like value you can get out of that, right? So Unforgiven has some really, really, really sick things. They also have an access to a fallback shoot and charge, which is just freedom of movement, which is just freaking amazing. You love that always. Of course, you can get that in Gladius or Stormlights as well, basically in Stormlights at least. But right now, you're looking at some pretty sick things. Now, Unbreakable Lines would be a pretty good rule, but it's 2 CP. It's just that it just needs to be dropped down to 2 CP, and that's the stratagem that allows you to get -1 to be wounded if your opponent charges you. For 2 CP, that's just pretty bad. Happy to admit that. And then lastly, you can always pop Fire Discipline, which will give you Assault, Heavy, and Ignore Cover. How does that stack really well? Well, you could put that on perhaps a unit of Assault Bolters for Inceptors. So suddenly their AP1 is actually an AP1, and then perhaps put another CP on it to also give them lethal hits, because those Assault Bolters have sustained hits too. Now they're sustained hits too and lethal hits. If you're shooting to an Oath of Moment target, why not just go ahead and try to get crits on 5s if you have something that's battle shocked? That one unit of Bolter Inceptors becomes disgustingly efficient. So there are just some really, really amazing damage combinations that you can make in Unforgiven. Let's go on into the next detachment. Next detachment is going to be the Inner Circle. Now, this one is interesting to me. I'm trying really hard to make this work. I don't think this is a very good detachment, but there are some extremely underlooked things in the Inner Circle detachment. So basically, the detachment rule is that you'll get +1 to wound on objectives by infantry, and there's certain stipulations. So it's like you can choose one objective that you control or all objectives you don't control that your infantry models can then get +1 to wound on in melee. Now, you have an enhancement that can give lethal hits to the bearer. It has to be a Deathwing model. Who happens to be Deathwing? Terminators and librarians in Terminator armor. Now, this librarian in Terminator armor, his natural ability is to give sustained hits to the unit that he leads. And then this enhancement that you can give him also allows him to give lethal hits to the unit. Then it'll also give you crits on 5s if you're onto your vowed objective, which is the objective that you're going to be attacking on or defending. If you do this combination, you can have a librarian leading a unit of Deathwing Knights who now have both lethal and sustained on 5s, and they'll be +1 to wound when they're going into their vowed objective, which is absolutely brutal because that almost doubles the damage output of this unit. In addition to being, still built like a brick shithouse where they just basically can't be damaged. Sorry, guys, my mouth got away from me. I try not to curse on this channel, but, Sorry. Uh, and so now they're still incredibly tough. Now they also hit like a freaking freight train. If you happen to be oath into that target, oh my gosh, you're going to murder anything in the game with that unit. This becomes extremely disgusting. Not to mention you have another strat that can even give you reroll wound rolls. So the damage potential of this particular unit is one of the highest in the game, which is kind of freaking crazy when you really think about how durable that unit is in addition. Now, you also have combinations where you can do turn one deep strikes with your Deathwing Knights on Termes. Now, personally, and I'll show you another combination with this later on that I like even more. I actually like doing this with an Ancient, with a Terminator and with an Ancient and Terminator armor, because that Ancient and Terminator armor is going to give the unit +1 to their OC. So if you go first, then you can do a turn one deep strike onto your opponent's natural expansion, ideally behind cover. That's 12 OC that you have sitting on your opponent's natural expansion, which makes it almost impossible, not actually impossible, but almost impossible for most of the armies in the game to be able to hold their natural expansion in turn two, which is a really, really big deal. Now, you can stack with this with the fact that if you ever do take the Lion, which a lot of times you would take the Lion, because in my opinion, he's probably the best Primarch right now. And I know there'll be arguments that that'll probably be a different video, but you could actually do this turn one deep strike with them and do a turn one rapid ingress with the Lion if you go first. I'll flesh that entire out in another video, so I'm not going to get into all the details right now. Which means that if you go first, you're really happy. And if you go second, you're also really happy because there's an innate advantage to going second. So this is actually a very, very cool thing to kind of bias it where you don't care if you go first or second, which I like a lot. Then, like I said, you got the full reroll of wound strat with +1 to wound. It is unfortunately limited to your infantry, but even the inner circle, which a lot of people have written off as a terrible detachment, is actually pretty dang decent when you start going through it. So I said at the beginning of this where I don't think this is a good detachment. I take that back. This actually is a very decent detachment. It's not as objectively good as a Gladius or a Stormlance, like I think Unforgiven kind of can be, but it is still a useful detachment that you can build some crazy things on. Just imagine how it would feel to have a lethal and sustain crits on 5s with full rerolls to hit and full rerolls to wound Deathwing Knight squad. That's brutal. Okay, so just so you understand how disgusting that is. Now, let's go on into the Company of Hunters. Now, Company of Hunters is actually one of the detachments that I think is objectively better than a lot of Gladius and Stormlance builds, and I'm going to explain why. Now, better in a very specific context, not generally. They're not generally better, but in a very specific context, they are better. Now, I know we saw Olivier Weiss, who's one of the best players in the world. He's from Team France, just amazing. He actually took these guys to the World Championships of Warhammer. I want to say it was last year. It could have been the year before that. But effectively, when he looked at this detachment, what he decided to do was he was going to run with the incredible rules that the detachment has for just the detachment rules. And he was going to kind of ignore the fact that the stratagems suck. Because in all reality, the stratagems do kind of suck. But you've got some really, really incredible detachment rules. So basically, everything in the army is going to always have advance, fall back, and shoot. More or less, you've got permanent dev doctrine / half, tactical doctrine. But if you're mounted, you also get to charge, which is amazing for Outriders and Black Knights. And Black Knights become very, very interesting in this detachment. Now, you've got an enhancement that will allow a turn one rapid ingress, or just come in turn one, which is very, very powerful. You could put that on, like a Raven Wing command squad, for example. That will allow you to rapid ingress turn one, especially, if you go second, right? Which can basically just really, really screw your opponent up. And this rapid ingress turn one does get around the core rules that say you can't do it because of the way the enhancement is phrased. Then you also have a 9-inch scout move. I actually love this 9-inch scout move with, say, a chaplain who's leading a unit of Outriders. That would mean that if you go first, you get a 9-inch move, and then you get a 12-inch plus advance. This is actually an exceptionally fast unit. You could also put that on a Raven Wing command squad as well to kind of guarantee like turn one charges and massive jail. So this army has the ability to jail like crazy. Once again, it has potential to not really care if it goes first or second because it loves rapid ingressing turn one, but it also loves taking advantage of that 9-inch scout move turn one. Samael and the Raven Wing champion from the command squads both become absolute nightmares in this detachment. Samael, I really like him leading Outriders because he loves getting the extra damage and strength when Outriders are with him, because that then puts him, I think it puts him up to, does that get him to strength 8? I always forget what that gets him to. It might take him to strength 6 or strength 7, but it gets him to that flat damage 3 with sustained hits 2. So he becomes a absolute nightmare. He also will innately gives him advance and charge, which means that he's going to give them +1 to the advance and +1 to the charge roll because that's what his data sheet ability says if he already has advance to charge. So Samuel becomes disgusting in this detachment and he hits like a freaking freight train. And so does the Ravenwing champions. Now, Ravenwing champions, you can argue, do you want to run them with Outriders or Black Knights? Black Knights are great choices because suddenly they're resurrecting these plasma guys who are killing themselves. But on the flip side of it, leading with Outriders also gives him a flat 3 damage sword when he charges in. So you could argue like which is better. I think both have absolutely vital things, valid arguments towards them. Basically, in this detachment, the strats do suck, but the detachment rule is incredible. And let's not sleep on how good that detachment rules just for your general Space Marine stuff. Vindicators love to advance, fall back, and shoot. Lancers love to advance, fall back, and shoot. You freaking if you have like impulsors that have like Udo guys inside of it shooting, they love it. If you have freaking Gladiator Reapers that like to advance and shoot, that's crazy. Actually, Gladiator Valiants become interesting in this attachment because they actually have the ability to constantly have the motion to get themselves inside that melter range. So there are a lot of just generic Space Marine units that love this detachment as well. So Company Hunters has some very real play. It does require specific models and a very specific build to do it. But if you like that build, dang, you can do some serious work with this thing between crazy jail pressure and just a lot of output, even though your strats do kind of blow. 2 more. Lion's Blade Task Force. This is my opinion is probably the most disappointing of all the detachments because when we saw this originally, I think this was a Grotmus detachment. Then, oh, excuse me. Pardon me. My apologies. Big sneeze. All right, so when we saw this originally, I thought it was going to be truly amazing. Now, it does have some really, really interesting things behind it, but it's not quite as good as I originally thought it was going to be, and that was pretty disappointing. So basically, the detachment rule for this was your Ravenwing units get to cause desperate escapes when people fall back for them, and Deathwing units get +2 to charge if they're engaged with units that are also engaged with Ravenwing units. So remember, Deathwing is basically all vehicles and your walkers, right? So like, interestingly enough, like a gladiator or like, sorry, not a gladiator, well, yeah, gladiator or like a land raider redeemer is also going to be Deathwing. So like it could get +2 to charge, which is, interesting. More interesting would be like a Brutalis Dreadnought getting +2 to charge because it is Deathwing, right? This detachment has the ability to create a real Smash Captain because they've got enhancement that gives +1 damage. So you can get that damage 3 Power Fist with the full rerolls to wound, with the devastating wounds due to your once per game finest hour if you're attached to either Stern Guard or even Assault Intercessors. So you can get a real good Smash Captain that can also be a very nice Judiciary. You also have a enhancement for Uppy Downy on Deathwing, which can allow for turn 1 deep strikes if you go second, which is kind of cool. You also have an amazing stratagem, which is a Kool-Aid Man strat. The Kool-Aid Man just meaning you get to ignore ruins and stuff, so you get to go straight through it. This works really, really well on Samael and on things like Storm Ravens. So now Storm Ravens can just fly straight through terrain, which is really strong. And don't forget that Storm Raven is Raven Wing. You've got a stratagem that says if your Raven Wing shoots anything, all of your Deathwing then gets +1 to wound it in shooting. This opens up things like the Raven Wing just gets to shoot a target, and then your Land Raider Redeemer with his heavy flamers is now +1 to wound against that target. Even your freaking Redemptor Dreadnought will get +1 to wound, which can be very powerful. There's some people I've seen who have pulled this off, which is very fascinating to me. But Hellblasters led by Azrael are now Deathwing, and now they're getting +1 to wound in shooting, which is actually a very fascinating thing. Now, I don't think this Hellblaster combo is nearly as good as it is in, say, the Unforgiven, like we spoke about, but it is a real thing that you can actually play. Then you have one of the best stratagems in the game, which is charge at the end of your opponent's charge phase with some restrictions. Deathwing units get to do it, and it's a 6-inch charge at the end of your opponent's charge phase. You get to charge if you're within 6 inches of your opponent at the end of the charge phase. This is just objectively better than heroic interventions in most scenarios because now you get to see all of the charges before you decide if you want to go in. So this can also make it almost impossible for your army to be move blocked if you have a bunch of Deathwing, because the closest they could ever be is 6.1 inches away. Otherwise, you're charging them in their turn, which is very bad for them. That's a very, very good stratagem. Now, it is objectively worse than almost the identical stratagem in another detachment, but it's very useful. So then we also had like Samael. He really likes this detachment, kind of like we spoke about earlier, because he can move straight through walls. He gets the advanced charge. Things can be cool. So Lion's Blade has some interesting things. I just think overall it was a swing and a miss on the detachment rule, and some of the stratagems are just not quite there. Like that should be a 1 CP for the charge at the end of the charge phase instead of 2 CP. Lion's Blade could be really good. There's just some minor things they need to change it. And then Wrath of the Rock. Now this one is, I'm arguing, and I'm putting it right up there with Gladius and Stormlance. I think this detachment is actually bonkers and really, really, really good. So here's my pitch, and then I'll finish up the video. Sorry, we're going a little long here. The detachment rule is you're going to be -1 to be wounded on infantry and mounted if the strength of the attack is higher than your toughness, which is basically all the time. Because pretty much, I mean, not actually everything, but almost everything in the game wounds Space Marine bodies on 3s, which means now everything's wounding Space Marines bodies on 4s. That is a massive increase in your durability right off the rip. But let's see how this kind of stacks. Now we've got certain units like an Inner Circle Companion, who are always going to be -1 to be hit when they're led by a character, which they're always going to be led by a character. Now they're effectively always -1 to be hit, more or less always -1 to be wounded. If they're led by, say, Azrael, they're going to have a 4-pin invulnerable save, or a Librarian, a 4-pin vulnerable save. This makes them incredibly durable. This makes them actually stupidly durable, which can cause really, really big problems for your opponents. A Justiciar leading them, now they're -1 to be hit, -1 to be wounded, and you're fighting first. This causes a lot of problems for your opponents. Now, you have a stratagem for an extra Oath of Moment target, which is always useful. Like you killed your unit with Oath of Moment in shooting, then you can spend 2 CP or 1 CP if you have a captain to also reduce the cost of it, to then switch your Oath to a target that you wanted to charge. Very, very powerful. We know how Ultramarines love that by bringing Bobby G. You get extremely high OC combinations here. This is where I really like to do my turn 1 Deep Strike. So we have an enhancement for a turn 1 Deep Strike in this army. I'm always going to put that on my Ancient and Terminator armor. So my Deathwing Knights with my Ancient and Terminator armor are going to turn 1 Deep Strike. Now in this detachment, my Deathwing Knights become obnoxiously durable because I can have -1 because they're -1 to be wounded if your strength is higher than theirs. Then they're also in cover with -1 to damage. I have access to 2-up armor save, 4-pin vulnerable save. You get access to armor contempt. It is disgusting how tough those guys are. But in this detachment, it goes even a step further because now, since they have the OC2 natively from the Terminator and the Ancient and Terminator armor, but you have a stratagem that can be used in the command phase, not yours, the command phase. So if those Deathwing Knights are engaged with the enemy, you can spend 1 CP to give them +1 OC, which means they can go up to OC3. But it doesn't stop there because it's used in the command phase. So you can actually use it again in your opponent's turn. So you can get your Deathwing Knights up to OC4, which can just be truly impossible for your opponent to overcome when they're trying to take objectives. This is very, 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 very powerful. Now, there is a limitation. You do have to be in engagement range with it, so you need something that's durable enough to survive being in engagement range, which would be, Deathwing Knights. Maybe ICC in this detachment, just because they have the -1 to be hit and the -1 to be wounded. You get a 1 CP charge at the end of your opponent's charge phase, and it's going to be within 6 inches for Deathwing units and within 3 inches for everything else. Very, very powerful strat. Once again, it means you can't be move blocked. It means that you can heroic intervene in one place and then do this charge in another place. It causes nightmares for your opponent in the fight phase or in the charge phase. You have one heck of a Smash Captain. You have the craziest Smash Captain, because there's an enhancement that gives +2 strength, +1 damage, and +1 AP. It's called Ancient Weapons. I put this on a normal captain with a Power Fist who's walking with your freaking Assault Intercessors. It's a relatively cheap unit that can go out there. He's going to have 8 attacks when he activates his once per game finest hour. It's going to be 8 attacks at straight, hitting on 2s, probably going to have rerolls or something. Going to be strength 10, rerolling wound rolls, and it's going to be devastating wounds. I've had this guy just walk in and pick up an entire squad of Blade Guard veterans. I've had him pick up an entire squad of 8-bound. He becomes an absolute menace. I've had him one-tap Bobby G. He becomes disgusting in this detachment. You can also take that enhancement and put it on a Justiciar to make that Justiciar even more oppressive when your opponent tries to charge into your unit that's going to be fighting first. I've even found success putting it on a Librarian who is leading ICC to give the ICC a 4-pin vulnerable save. So there are lots of ways that you could actually run this enhancement. We've got the turn 1 Deep Strike, which we've already spoken about, and we've already spoken about how ICC become just absolute menaces. So this detachment is absolutely amazing, and I just want to give one quick shout out to actually a client of mine. Amazing guy. I'm going to call him Bob. I'm not going to say any other words because I'm not sure he wants to really identify himself. But he came up with the idea of actually taking suppressors in this detachment. Now, a lot of people think suppressors suck. I think they're interestingly good after it was explained to me because they can just shoot something and put a -1 to hit buff. So if I really wanted to, I could make my Deathwing Knights -1 to be hit, -1 to be wounded, -1 damage, 2-up armor save, in cover, armor contempt. It basically makes them immortal. And 75 points for a suppressor unit. They move 12 inches. They have deep strike. You don't care if you just have to sacrifice them. So they can come down, get you area denial, shoot the super scary thing that you don't want to be really effective in your opponent's turn, make them -1 to be hit, not care when they die because they get you area denial as well. And don't forget, they're infantry, so they're also going to be -1 to be wounded, which causes problems. I have one really funny thing to say, and then I'm going to end the video. I was playing a game into Knights, and I got hit with a Volcano Lance. You know, the casual, like, strength 24, D6 plus 8 damage, AP 6 or whatever. And the guy rolled a 2 while he was shooting my scout. And since my scout was -1 to be wounded, the scout just ate a Volcano Lance to the face and was like, hi, and didn't care. Very funny. Guys, these are Dark Angels. You have some really awesome things in these detachments. I will say that out of all of them, I think Wrath is definitely the best. Unforgiven has a lot of play. And Hunter's Cohort contextually is going to be at least as good as your Stormlance and your Gladius as well. So that's my thoughts on these guys. Every single one of these has play. I think Lion's Blade is probably the worst. Inner Circle is really interesting, and you can actually play with it, but it does get a little tricky because it's missing out on just a little bit. Like if it had access to an advanced charge, I think I'd be all here for Inner Circle. So all these things are right on the edge. They're not useless. I hear so much dooming about them. Don't doom. Be excited about some of the cool stuff that you can do with them and actually start building for it. Hopefully this inspires you. And until next time, crump on. Bye-bye.